Cracks have begun to show in Israel's war cabinet over the future of the Gaza Strip. Former Defense Minister Benny Gantz is threatening to resign from the cabinet unless the government comes up with a concrete plan for a post-war Gaza. He had joined as a show of unity after Hamas launched the October 7th terrorist attack. Now Gantz has set a 3-week deadline, ramping up the pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Meanwhile, fighting between Israel and Hamas is intensifying. Northern Gaza is seeing some of the fiercest battles of the war so far, months after Israel declared the end of operations in the area. While in the south, hundreds of thousands flee fighting in Rafah, many of them not for the first time.
Heavy clashes rock the southern Gazan city of Rafah as Israel pushes ahead with its assault against Hamas. The United Nations says 800,000 people, more than a third of Gaza's population, have been displaced from the area, despite having nowhere to go. The northern part of the Strip is also under fire. In Jabalia, Israeli tanks roll through the devastated streets. The army says it's conducting, quote, precise operations against terrorists and infrastructure. Inside Israel, thousands joined the weekly anti-government protests in Tel Aviv. They want the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to resign and new elections to be called.
This government is taking our country to places that I don't want to see my country go to. I see corruption, I see lack of hope, I see lack of vision, I see mediocrity and even below that, and we want change.
Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, new cracks are emerging in Netanyahu's coalition. Centrist Benny Gantz, seen by some as a moderating voice in an otherwise ultra-conservative government, gave the rest of the cabinet an ultimatum.
While Israeli soldiers are displaying incredible bravery on the front, some of the people who sent them to battle are acting with cowardice. The War Cabinet must write down and ratify an action plan that will lead to the realization of 6 strategic objectives of national importance by the 8th of June. If Benjamin Netanyahu chooses to follow the zealots and lead the nation into an abyss, I will resign from the government.
If Gantz does resign, it would not force an election. The coalition still has a majority. But there are fears a moderate voice would be lost at a time when it's needed the most.
So what effect will this renewed heavy fighting have on the current Israeli government strategy and policy? Our Middle East analyst Schani Rozanes is here to talk about it. Good to see you, Schani. There has been a rather dramatic statement by War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz. What's he had to say?
Yes, well, he joined the government shortly after October 7th to strengthen the government as an emergency unity government. He is a former general in the Israeli army. He's considered to be a centrist politician. And what he's saying tonight to Netanyahu is basically he's setting an ultimatum. He's saying the country has been hijacked by the most extreme parts of the right coalition. We need to do a complete rehaul of our strategy. He's demanding several things, but the 2 most important ones are demilitarizing Gaza in the civil way, sort of like making sure that the Israeli military can only operate when needed, but that the daily conduct of what's happening in Gaza, whoever takes care of Gaza and the Gazan population need would not be Israel, but rather a joint alliance that is headed and led by the Americans. And he also talks about Israel publicly announcing and making active steps in order to get into this normalization pact with Saudi Arabia, something the Americans have been promoting for the last months, that will bring, American-Saudi alliance together with Israel, and along with that also a lot of many other moderate Sunni countries, in hopes to sort of reshape the balance of power in the Middle East against Iran. So these are some of his ultimatums tonight. And we are seeing basically in this statement that all that we've been hearing quietly whispered by anonymous sources in the last months is actually out in the open, a very open rift, a very open disagreement between the most leading figures in the Israeli government these days.
OK, so there's a lot packed in there. The gauntlet has been laid down, an ultimatum, as you say. What then has Benjamin Netanyahu had to say in response?
Well, he immediately pushes it back. He says, well, ultimatums should not be set to me, but rather to Hamas, and Gantz's words will bring defeat to Israel. His attitude will not help us win. And Gantz is trying to push back against that. We see a lot of this back and forth. And interestingly enough, you would wonder, well, Netanyahu is the prime minister. He could just, if he wanted, he could fire Benny Gantz right now. Why is he not doing it? Or why is Benny Gantz not actively saying immediately, I'm withdrawing from the government? And so what we're seeing here, this political dance where both sides are trying to put the blame on the other, because there's an understanding that the minute that Benny Gantz and his party are out of the coalition, Netanyahu still technically has the numbers, but he doesn't have the public legitimacy. And that might be the first brick in the domino effect of mass protests in Israel that might actually shake up Netanyahu's political stability for the first time in real circumstances, possible for him, first time since October.
So it's worth asking the obvious question, where does this leave the war cabinet? Where does this leave the government right now?
It's a very good question. There's no doubt that when it comes to handling the war and making decisions, you think of the families of the hostages. They look at this and they're completely in despair because they don't feel like anybody has their interest in his, top of his agenda. And of course, that's not a good position for Israel to be in. I'm sure it's very satisfying for Hamas to see this. We will see Jack Sullivan, the American National Security Advisor, coming to Israel tomorrow from Riyadh, from Saudi Arabia, still trying to make maybe something out of this mess and try to get Israel to move into some sort of a strategic, horizon. It's a task that the Americans have been trying to get Netanyahu to agree on for a couple of months already. Maybe now with this public, outing of Minister Gantz, something will change up in Israeli leadership.
A really interesting moment. Our Middle East analyst, Schani Rozanes, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
We can now speak with Ahmed Bayram with the Norwegian Refugee Council. That's an NGO carrying out humanitarian work in Gaza. He joins us from Amman. Good to have you with us. So, Ahmed, as we just saw in that report, there are different visions of a future for Gaza that are now causing deep rifts inside the Israeli government. How, if at all, do you think this could change the situation on the ground?
Judging by what is happening, not very much. It seems that Israel is pressing ahead with its ground operations. There are, obviously reports of troops massing around that area. At the same time, like you've just reported, there's, of course, intense escalation in the northern part. So our teams on the ground, the Norwegian Refugee Council, has been pushed all the way to the west of Rafah, and that's a bad sign, a sign that, things are getting worse and worse over, the hours, not really days or weeks, and particularly with the numbers now, 700,000 people we are hearing have been displaced over the last 10 days. So things don't look anything but grim on the ground, and people, have been left, to really battle for their survival.
But hearing that a heavyweight in the cabinet, Benny Gantz, giving Benjamin Netanyahu and his government basically an ultimatum to come up with a solution for a post-war Gaza, do you think this could weaken or strengthen Israel in this current situation, also fighting both in the north and the south of Gaza?
Of course. We've been hearing, without getting into too much politics, as a representative of a humanitarian organization, we see things from a humanitarian point of view. And I can tell you that the politics that has been played out in recent weeks and months, of course, the disagreement within the Israeli cabinet, and at the same time, the disagreement with Israel's allies, really led by the United States, have continued while the operations on the ground have not stopped. So there is kind of, there's a kind of diplomacy that is being played in the background, and at the same time, disagreements are being played in the background. we don't see much impact of that on the ground, as in, the impact that we want to see, the positive change that we want to see, which is, a ceasefire. If anything, what is happening in the political corridors is only, negatively reflecting on the situation on the ground, which means that probably we are never, close to a ceasefire agreement with, given these, disagreements on the Israeli side. So we hope that, anything that, when it comes to politics and when it comes to Israel's relationships with the US, we hope that pressure comes from these countries, from Israel's allies, which we look for, for a change.
A political solution is definitely needed. Meanwhile, some 800,000 people have left Rafah over the last 2 weeks, and many of them have been displaced before. Just briefly, where are they going?
In every direction, really. It's a race to the west as it stands, closer to the beach area, which is not made for human life, really. Closer to Khan Yunis, where there's so much destruction, and our teams have reported the increase in prices in things like tents and water and rent. So people are fleeing in that direction, and with the intensification of the ground operation, things are getting worse and worse.
All right, Ahmed Bayram from the Norwegian Refugee Council joining us from Amman. Ahmed, thank you so much.